is entitled The Royal County Orangemen, the Orange Heritage of County Meath. With Langford, Plunkett, Lambert at their head, the men of Meath with manly step appear, as did the loyal yeomanry when led against the foe and broke rebellion's spear. Brave Captain Preston's Navan men in red, true hearts who ne'er were skulking in the rear, rushed to the charge as quick as cannonball, and beat the savage rebels at old Tara's Hall. A verse from the 1869 poem, The Marching of the Lodges, devoted to Meath Orangism and its then 6 Orange Lodges, and casting its imagery in mind back to those connections with the local events of the 1798 rebellion. Now, the moniker, this title, the Royal County, in reference to Meath, is one commonly known and referenced, with the origins of that label almost universally attributed to its one-time status as seat of the High King of Ireland. What is equally as plausible is that the appellation came along with the plantation in the Middle Ages of a large number of English, who of course were loyal to the crown. An explanation all the more attractive with the acknowledgement that these Old English came to control Meath under the auspices of Dublin's royal authorities. Despite the complex and often hypocritical development of the continually competing interests of those defining themselves as royalist or confederate or parliamentarian, the Reformation and subsequent birth of Protestant Ireland ensured that a faction considering themselves loyalists would take hold in Meath. In the aftermath of the iconic Battle of the Boyne in its borderlands with Louth, it is no surprise that a considerable portion of this faction would come to happily identify itself as Orange. Now, throughout the 1700s, Orangism was a largely civic enterprise as opposed to a populist grassroots movement. In the aftermath of the Battle of the Diamond near the picturesque Armagh village of Loughgall in September 1795, a skirmish between rival agrarian factions, the Peepit Day Boys and the Defenders, the Orange Institution, was born. The apparent sectarian characteristics of the affray were not exclusive to County Armagh. Indeed, a group of Meath defenders in 1796, along with their desire to regulate the price of labour, rent of land and value of provisions, were said to frequent each fair, market and alehouse, threatening to knock the brains of every Protestant. Now, the existence of these and similar sentiments on both sides of the religious divide, alongside the deployment of Orangemen via the ranks of the Ulster Yeomanry, facilitated the spread of the new organised Orangism across Ireland, even prior to the 1798 rebellion. By the early months of that year, there were at least 3 Orange Lodges that had been formed in the northwest of County Meath. At least 3, because the records are not all complete. Surviving details indicate LOL 535 was based at Lakefield, just south of the town of Oldcastle. LOL 577 was at Kilmainham Wood, and LOL 642 was at the county town of KELLS. Information on Orange activity in Meath in the opening few decades of the 19th century is, not surprisingly, sparse. In the aftermath of the 1798 rebellion, Orange fervour subsided, only to be reignited by new spells of agrarian violence and the Daniel O'Connell-led campaign for Catholic emancipation. The introduction of the Unlawful Oaths Act of 1823 and Unlawful Societies Act of 1825 were primarily designed to subvert the effectiveness of O'Connell's Catholic Association. However, they also had an impact on the Orange institution. Its forced reorganisation resulted in its revitalisation. In 1828, the Tipperary Free Press printed an extract from a private letter claiming that there was a colony of Orangemen planted in the town of KELLS. But Orangemen now existed right across the Royal County, and within their ranks were some of the most highly regarded and influential gentry in the whole of Ireland. In 1831, Hercules Langford Rowley of Summerhill, second Baron Langford, otherwise known as Lord Langford, was initiated into the Orange institution. Langford was fast-tracked into the organisation, being introduced straight away into the Grand Orange Lodge of Ireland on the 19th of December, and immediately going through the several degrees, the several rituals required to make him a fully qualified Orangeman. Langford's very high social status, quite possibly being the reason that these established protocols were breached. On the 21st of January, a warrant for number 702 was reissued to the Lord. It had previously been active since at least 1823, defined as covering the Summerhill district and holding its meetings in Langford's home, Summerhill House. On the 19th of that month, he attended a meeting of the Grand Orange Lodge of Ireland, where he was listed as a senior Deputy Grand Master of Ireland and as the first County Grand Master of County Meath. In 1834, the Grand Orange Lodge of Ireland attempted to compile a complete registry of all office bearers and existing county, district and private lodges. 4 Orange lodges for County Meath were listed at this time, covering 3 districts. The aforementioned LOL 702 Summerhill district, LOL 721 meeting at Trim underneath the designation of the Bygone district, LOL 802 Crossakeel district, and LOL 824 meeting in Navan Town. The Bygone district, Navan Town, it also was a part of this Bygone district with the Worshipful Master Henry Blackburn. Now, among the listing of Deputy Grand Masters of the Grand Orange Lodge of Ireland at this time, 7 of the 14 were from outside Ulster. And the presence of 2 Meath residents emphasises the importance of the county to Orangeism. The Right Honourable Lord Langford, as mentioned, from Summerhill House, was now joined by the new County Grand Master of Meath, the Honourable Randall Edward Plunkett of Dunsany Castle, Dunshaughlin. Plunkett of Dunsany Castle was of a dynasty that held the title Baron of Dunsany, which he would become the 15th Baron in 1848, and of a family line totally and deeply immersed in all of the contradictions of Irish history. His ancestor, the 11th Baron, also Randall Plunkett, had supported King James during the Glorious Revolution and had lost all of his estates accordingly, only to have them restored after the Treaty of Limerick. Another ancestor was Oliver Plunkett, the Catholic Archbishop of Armagh and Primate of all Ireland, executed for high treason on the 1st of July 1681 and eventually given sainthood status by the Pope. Now, the 12th Baron renounced the family's Catholicism in the mid-18th century to maintain his lands, and having conformed to the Church of Ireland, he paved the way for careers in the Houses of Parliament for his descendants. County Grand Master Plunkett was the Member of Parliament for Drogheda from 1835 to 1837, and his politics and position saw the Catholics of Meath refer to him colloquially, not particularly kindly, as Randy Plunkett. From 1833 he was also the worshipful master of LOL 721, meeting at Trim. Sometimes really interestingly noted as meeting at Tara. Tara, of course, the alleged ancient seat of the High King of Ireland. The other principal officers were of no less colourful family heritage than Plunkett. The Grand Secretary was William Wade, Esquire of Clonabreeny House, Crossakeel, near KELLS. The family's Irish lineage is said to have come with the arrival of an ancestor, also William, as a Puritan drummer boy with Oliver Cromwell. The family's story is that in the aftermath of the assault on Drogheda in 1849, Cromwell offered one of his officers' lands at Crossakeel as reward for service. After that officer declared he would not live in an old swamp like that, the young William Wade nearby stated he would be delighted to own 1,000 acres of such land. And in response, Cromwell is allegedly declared, "Young Wade, I will give you 2,000 acres." Ironically, prior to Wade, the lands had been under the ownership of the Plunkett family. Wade was the worshipful master of LOL 821 Crossakeel. In the months following the publication of this Grand Lodge of Ireland Register, on the 19th of September 1834, deputations from LOL 721 and 824 made the journey to Painstown to install a brand new Orange Lodge. After the ceremonial business was carried out, those in attendance shared a dinner described as being provided by one of the most estimable gentlemen and best landlords in the county, namely the worshipful master of this freshly installed lodge, Gustavus Lambert of Beaupark, SLANE. Lambert that year was also named as county treasurer. He had been a lieutenant in the SLANE Yeomanry Cavalry during the 1798 rebellion, during which the stationing of Armagh militia in the village may well have given him his introduction to Orangeism. A one-time MP for Kilbeggan, that's Westmeath, he had voted against the Act of Union in 1800. LOL 559 had previously worked underneath the organisational jurisdiction of the Colin district that was within the County Louth Grand Orange Lodge, and the evening is highly likely to have simply been the marking of it, a marking of this lodge now coming underneath the authority and remit of a County Meath Grand Orange Lodge. Following dinner, a number of toasts were given, with that concluding the proceedings being made to the true Protestants of the County Meath, and may they be aroused to a sense of their danger and join heart and hand in the cause of their dearly obtained privileges and religion. The meeting also noted that Orange Warrant number 419 had been renewed in Clonmelon, County Westmeath, and to date had enlisted over 100 members. Now, the events that surrounded the 1835 Parliamentary Select Committee report and the calls for the dissolving of the Orange institution were ignored by many Orange lodges across Ireland. However, in Meath, the lodges immediately publicly capitulated without dissent, perhaps due to the very high proportion of gentry involved. A very heavily syndicated report in newspapers across Ireland and the British Isles gave details of meetings of the Trim and Summer Island lodges on the 5th and 7th of March, respectively. The details forthcoming from the Trim meeting stated unambiguously that it was dissolving due to the recommendations of the County Grand Master of Meath, Master Randall Plunkett, described as being prompt and manly, alongside the advice from others at the head of the institution. Both lodges also resolved to prepare an address to His Majesty that assured him of their unalterable attachment to the principles which placed his family on the throne, and their determination to uphold the regular succession to that throne, being Protestant. It finished by emphasising that even though the lodges were disbanding, as Orangemen, we still appreciate as good the motives for which we first associated, namely the defence of our religion, lives and property, which, with God's blessing, we will never surrender. Now, the overt supplication of the Trim and Summerhill Orange Lodges may well have been influenced by the events just a few months previously. Now, during an election campaign in January, where Plunkett and Gustavus Lambert were the two Conservative candidates, it was reported that Plunkett had an entourage of 200 armed Orangemen at a rally in Trim on the 23rd of January as a form of guard. Plunkett addressed the men. Some of them were said to have been from Cavan, Kildare and Westmeath, and later via the pages of the Dublin Evening Mail stated to them, "To those brave Orangemen who attended at Trim, my thanks are due for the protection afforded." In the aftermath, as different parties returned home, a group in KELLS were involved in a fracas during which a man named John Henry was killed. During the trial of 3 Orangemen for the murder, the opening evidence came from a friend of the victim stating that after leaving a public house with Henry, they had encountered a group of men who had said, "Where are the rebel rascals? Dare oppose us now?" John Henry, he said, answered with, "To hell with Randy and all his breed and them that take his part," with the response a cry of, "Blow his brains out, he's a rebel," and a number of strikes with a sword or bayonet. A jury for the trial was composed of 6 Catholics and 6 Protestants. Unsurprisingly failed to come to agreement, and the 3 men were acquitted. There's no recorded disorder in the aftermath of the incident. Now, whether or not the announcements of the Trim and Summerhill lodges that they were folding was genuine capitulation to powers that be, or alternatively merely lip service for public consumption, there is evidence that the actions did not have the entire support of the then Meath Orange community. At the end of April 1835, just a month later, another Orange warrant was issued in the county. LOL 1345 was issued to Robert Burke Hayes, and it was actually given the title of the Bygone Orange Lodge. Burke of Hayes House would in later years become the 5th Earl of Mayo. In 1838, another lodge was renewed. That was LOL 899, working and meeting in Athboy. In June 1859, a few short lines from a correspondent in the Meath People newspaper purported that staunch upholders of the established church in the Navan suburbs of Bohermine and Ardbraccan were out of the blue, unexpectedly full of a profound veneration for all that is good and glorious, with glorious in special hyphens, no doubt signifying the glorious revolution or the great and glorious King William. He went on to state that these individuals had expressed a desire to join what he referred to as the Royal and True Society of Orangemen, and had actually been visited by this point by a delegation from the organisation. Both delegation and party of welcome on that occasion visited a house well known for its hospitality, where he also said the stimulant is unequalled, and remained there until the hills were gilt with golden beams. Now, where that correspondent obtained his information is unknown. However, on this occasion, he was undoubtedly correct. That same month, a long dormant lodge was revived. LOL 824 was resurrected after being allegedly not meeting for 25 years, with John Hodgins of Fahan Hill the main its worshipful master, and Fahan Hill being just a very short distance from both Boherman and Ardbracken. A few months previously, November 1858, LOL 802 had again been issued to County Meath. In 1834 it had been working in Crossakeel, but Grand Lodge records noted that it had been inactive for about 30 years. Now this new warrant was issued to Walter Bowles, the Bowles family being residents at Athboys. And both of these new lodges were classed as being working underneath the banner of the KELLS district. Rare newspaper reportage of public manifestations of Orange sentiment in County Meath came in 1863, when it was described that orange lilies were displayed in the windows and 2 orange flags had been erected at St Columba's Church of Ireland in KELLS on the 12th of July. These flags bore the mottos 1690 and Hail Happy Day. The Dublin Weekly Nation paper outlined that the displays were deliberately designed to insult peaceable subjects, and that but for the energies of the local constabulary there would have been rioting. Now, at least part of the antagonistic response to the emblems appears to have been due to resentment at the church's status as the law-established church and it being situated on ancient ruins. The period running up to the disestablishment of the Church of Ireland may have been the stimulus for the resurrection of another dormant Meath lodge. In November 1866, the former lodge of Randall, Plunkett, Trim LOL 721, was revived with the worshipful master, a man by the name of Sillery Wilson. In 1878, another new lodge was formed, and this time in Oldcastle, underneath the worshipful master John Gray. Now, this LOL 596 eventually would join and work with the Ballyjames-Duff district of County Cavan Grand Orange Lodge, and by 1891 its meeting place was given as Baltrasna. Of course, Ballyjames-Duff was just north over the County Cavan border. Now, Baltrasna is a really interesting place. It had Orange connections stretching back several decades. In 1843, it was reported in the Drogheda Conservative Journal that the funeral of a newly deceased or recently deceased Orangeman was accompanied from his house in Baltrasna by 200 Orangemen to his burial place at Loughcrew. Its worshipful master in 1891 was Matthew Richard Weld O'Connor of Ballytrasna House. Quite an infamous figure locally. O'Connor had been referenced as being an unprincipled land agent who was despised by the tenantry, to whom he showed little clemency. He was also the father of a very, very distinguished military officer and diplomat, Lieutenant Colonel Sir William Frederick Travers O'Connor, renowned for his travels throughout Asia and accompanying map making and study of language. Now, surviving records indicated that in both 1893 and 1894, the Baltrasna Orange Lodge 596 had 15 brethren in its ranks. Also pictured in our presentation is a very, very rare County Meath relic of Orangeism, an orange sash belonging to the Baltrasna Orange Lodge. The last lodge formed in County Meath, indeed the last one that appears to have been based within its borders, was one meeting back in Langley's, Lord Langley's home borough, Summerhill, the Summerhill area. LOL 1945 was formed actually as late as October 1895, and that almost certainly owes its existence directly to the hands of its sole worshipful master during its life. The County Tyrone-born Reverend J.L. Stewart had arrived in the locality in 1892 to become the rector of the Acher Church of Ireland, more well known for once having as its rector famous satirist and author of Gulliver's Travels, Jonathan Swift. During the closing years of the 19th century, CAVAN unionist newspaper, the CAVAN Weekly News, which folded in 1907, when reporting on the 12th of July commemorations in East Cavan, often referred to them as being the annual celebrations for the Orangemen of East Cavan and North Meath. LOL 1948 or 1945 ceased working in 1899. The Baltrasna Orange Lodge had been closed just 3 years before. Now, despite the folding of the Baltrasna and Summerhill Orange Lodges before the onset of the 20th century, references to Meath Orangemen participating in Cavan Orange processions continued to be made as late as 1931. Loyal Orange Lodge number 56 was one of the oldest orange lodges working in County Cavan, with its name giving a clue to its geographical origins. At the opening of a new hall for Bracha LOL at Corkish near Baileyborough in 1921, an article in the Meath Chronicle explained how the lodge had some 80 or 90 years previously been formed and met beside Breaky Loch in the townland of Ballybreaky near Cormean Cross, County Meath. Its original meeting place was said to still exist at a field at Kilboyne in the ownership of a Mr. Bradley. A decline in its membership rather than resulting in a closing saw it remove its meeting place northerly, first to Killigriff in Meath, then to Tierworker on the Meath-Cavan border, and after further movement eventually settled in Corkish. Another Chronicle report in 1928 again mentioned the lodge, stating that many of its members, even in 1928, were still from the Royal County. The Royal Chronicle stated that it may be therefore news for our Meathian readers who have never seen an Orangeman in regalia to know that Meath has its quota of fully fledged members of the order. The lodge's Meath membership was mentioned again as late as 1931 when it made its way to a procession in Coothill along with its fife and drum band, only to find its way prevented by a large crowd of nationalists. In a subsequent episode of its history, in 1910, the Breaky Orange Hall was burnt down, the first of several times during the 20th century, and Breaky Orange Lodge 56, the Royal County Orange Lodge, is still active and operational in 2020. Now, notwithstanding the apparent absence of organised Orange Lodges within County Meath, it is apparent from events during the Third Home Rule crisis that there was still staunch loyalist sentiment present in the county. On the 17th of January 1914, the Meath Chronicle, reporting from the KELLS Urban District Council meeting, noted the comments of a Mr. Lawler, who stated that he had been informed that a branch of the Ulster Volunteer Force had been established near Headfort by some god-forgotten nincompoops. Further insight into militant Meath loyalism comes via the Bureau of Military History statements of the Vice Commandant of the Meath Brigade IRA, Sean Farley. In his deposition, Farley stated that a Mr. Archdale, who had married into the Rowley family of Sylvan Park, was a captain in the Ulster Volunteers and drilled Orangemen at Lochan in North Meath. He also recounted raids for arms at Sylvan Park, where they were held off by gunfire from the Mrs. Rowley, and at the home of the aforementioned Archdale, where after coming under very heavy fire, they eventually overwhelmed the owner. On that occasion, Farley alleges they were well rewarded with several rifles and a great quantity of ammunition that he said was the property of the Orangemen. Within a collection of folklore gathered in the 1930s, several contributors detail variations on the same prophecy, a broad mixture of myths, legends and interpretation of the works of St. Columkill. One version recalled by a contributor states, "It is prophesied that the black pig is to run from Dockett to SLANE, and from SLANE to Navan, and from Navan to Trim, and from Trim to Scariff, and from Scariff to Earl's Mill. The black pig is to run that journey for 9 nights and 9 days, when the Orangemen are to rise. The Orangemen are supposed to walk knee-deep in popish blood. For the first 3 days they'll be as strong in the saddle as an oak tree in the ground. The 4th day they'll fail at Earl's Mill, and they'll be beaten back into the sea." Another version states that there is an underground tunnel from Earl's Mill to a ford on the Shanco River. At the Earl's Mill end of the tunnel there is an underground apartment, and hundreds of men lie in it, apparently asleep. There is a sword hanging on the wall in a scabbard. When that sword will be taken out of the scabbard, Ireland will be free. Then all the soldiers will rise up and march to Ulster and defeat the Orangemen in battle. Until that happens, there will not be a united Ireland. It's still unknown if the prophecy is yet to be fulfilled. So ends our presentation this evening on the Royal County Orangemen, the Orangeism in County Meath. Indeed, there still is an Orangeman who proudly comes from and lives in the county. Thank you again for joining us. These videos are all available on the videos page of the Bygone Days page. They can be shared, they can be watched back at any time. Please consider sharing them via Watch Party on your pages and your groups as we try and spread as much of this lost history as possible. There are, of course, our Bygone Days booklets still available. Please contact the site for more information. Title number 38 is now released this week on the Bygone Obelisk, the very famous monument destroyed in 1923 in the banks of the famous river. Very, very interesting and relevant in the current times that we live. Join us again next week when, for our presentation, we return to some very poignant Ulster volunteer history. Next week, in association again with the North Ulster Act initiative, our subject will be the Ban Volley Volunteers, the Ulster Volunteer Force of the 3rd Battalion, Coleraine of the North Londonderry Regiment. Thank you again for joining Bygone Days History this week. Just remember, our history is very, very important. It's there to be learned from, not relived. It's also there not to be destroyed, forgotten or hidden.